Let's talk about the evolution of SAP software in this section. As you may know that SAP got its start in ERP software. When they first started, there was only one module for financial accounting. And at that time, the software was known as R1. And then over the years, they came out with different versions such as R2, R3, My SAP ERP, and now the latest version is known as ECC. Okay, but they are all different versions of ERP basically. And also notice that SAP has used different terms to describe their software products: solutions, components, capabilities. They have used those terms to refer to their software products. So they are basically the same as software. And for ERP, one big sales driver is Y2K. Okay, the Y2K problem. Some of you probably remember. This is the problem in year 2000. It was supposed to be a big problem for computer systems because early computer systems were built with COBOL programs, which did not account for the year 2000. I mean, they used 2 digits to represent years. So when year 2000 came around, you needed 4 digits as opposed to 2 digits to represent the years. And because of, there were many, millions of lines of COBOL programs out there that needed to be fixed, so it was supposed to be a big problem at that time. So as a result, a lot of companies simply gave up on their legacy systems and instead went ahead and buy ERP software, which was Y2K compliant. So that was the big sales driver for ERP at the time. And nowadays, all SAP software products can be classified into several categories that I talked about earlier. One is business applications, which includes all products that are used to support transaction processing or business processes. And second category is analytics, which supports analytical processing or OLAP processing. And still, we have a category for database and technology. Here, 2 main products. One is SAP HANA, and second is SAP NetWeaver, which I will talk more about in the next few slides. First is SAP NetWeaver, which, by the way, is kind of like a system software product that is used to support application processing. Okay, it's kind of like Microsoft Windows that is used to support Microsoft Office and other products from both Microsoft and other vendors. And for SAP products, the system software is NetWeaver. So BW also requires NetWeaver to run under it. Okay, so that's why you hear people use the term SAP NetWeaver BW. And BW is a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for several reasons. Okay, some of them are listed here. One is that it has a built-in business content. Business content basically is some predefined or pre-delivered objects that come with BW. This way, a company does not have to start from scratch when they try to go out and build a data warehouse. Okay, they have some existing objects and models that can take advantage of. And we'll talk more about business content in future chapters. Another advantage of BW is it is fully integrated with business objects. Business objects, by the way, is a company that SAP acquired a few years ago, mainly because of their strong front-end BI products. Okay, and those front-end products are fully integrated with BW. And third advantage is that BW is fully integrated with NetWeaver. As I mentioned earlier, that this is kind of like a system software product that supports all SAP applications, including ERP, CRM, BW, and so on. And I should also mention that it also supports non-SAP products as well. Okay, so we can integrate both SAP and non-SAP products through this integration platform known as NetWeaver. And finally, another advantage of BW nowadays is that it can also be integrated with high-performance in-memory appliance from SAP known as SAP HANA. Okay, HANA is the latest, the greatest from SAP, and it has all the buzz nowadays from SAP about this incredible product. And I have a link here that will take you to a dedicated website for SAP HANA, and it has all kinds of news about the latest developments, white papers, demos, testimonials, and so on about SAP HANA that you can learn more about if you are interested. And speaking of SAP HANA, I have a few slides that talk a little bit about this product. Okay, so the precursor to this product is actually related to BW. Okay, it's called SAP NetWeaver BWA. A is for accelerator. This is a separate piece of software that can be used alongside BW to accelerate processing of queries. Okay, so basically we can accelerate or speed up the processing of query with this separate software. And from the experience of developing a BWA, SAP eventually developed a separate HANA product, which is much more powerful and useful nowadays. Okay, so what is SAP HANA? It is basically an in-memory database. So it is a database, but it is running inside computer memory. Okay, so it is it's exceptionally fast because you're talking about computer memory as opposed to hard drive, which a traditional database will reside in. Okay, and also some other unique features about SAP HANA is that it can utilize both row and column storage, which is different from again a traditional database. Usually only utilize row storage. Okay, in a traditional database you have tables, for instance, and you have records which are represented as rows. So when you talk about, a million record database, basically you're talking about a million rows of data. Okay, but SAP HANA has both row and column storage capabilities, and also it takes advantage of a multi-core massive parallel processing architecture. So here on this slide, it explains in more detail the advantages of in-memory computing, the row and column storage, and also the massively parallel processing and so on. And then if we want to understand a little bit more about the architecture of this database and how it is related to other systems that a company may already have in place, this is a good diagram to do that. Okay. Now on the left-hand side, you have existing systems from SAP as well as from other vendors, third-party software. Okay, so for instance, on the left-hand side, toward the bottom, you have SAP Business Suite, such as ERP, CRM, and so on. And at the top, you have NetWeaver BW. Okay, and those systems generally are the ones that provide data to SAP HANA. Okay, so SAP HANA, the in-memory database, will get data from both SAP and non-SAP systems. Okay, we want to get data into SAP HANA so that we can take advantage of the in-memory computing speed to get results right away. Okay, results much quicker than in the past. And the results can then be passed on to, if you look at the top, you have SAP Business Objects, BI Solutions. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, that Business Objects is basically a company that SAP acquired for their front-end tools that can be used to tap into BW as well as other SAP systems for business intelligence. So similarly, data that is in a SAP HANA database can be utilized by business object tools for business intelligence consumption. And in addition to that, we can use other applications, including Excel, to analyze data that is coming out of SAP HANA database. So actually, I was talking about on the previous slide, one of the scenarios of utilizing HANA nowadays. Okay, now on the left-hand side is the first scenario for ERP systems. Okay, now if you look at the top left-hand corner, under ERP, you have an XDB, which is a database that can come from any vendor. Okay, the database can be from Oracle, from IBM, from Microsoft, and so on. Okay, and or even from SAP, they also have their own database product. So traditionally, an ERP system will be running on some type of database. And now this ERP system can provide data to a HANA database, as I mentioned earlier, in two different ways, basically. Okay, one is through a real-time duplication or real-time service, okay, for real-time processing. Other times, if there's no need for real-time duplication, then the data that is coming from this XDB can go into some kind of data services, and then from there, data can be further duplicated into the HANA database. Okay, so that's the first scenario, also known as side-by-side, where you have HANA running side-by-side ERP in a company. Okay, then at the top, similarly, you have BW that is running on a traditional database, XDB, maybe alongside a BWA, as I mentioned earlier, that can be used to accelerate the processing of queries. Okay, so that's one the traditional scenario, and then you can have BW providing data to HANA, which can be used for quicker processing of query, and then we can get business intelligence much quicker that way. Okay, so that's the first scenario called side-by-side. Then in the bottom part, you have one, on top scenario, which means that instead of XDB in the future, or at present in some companies, they now have HANA supporting ERP, or HANA supporting BW directly without other databases involved. Okay, so instead of XDB, you have HANA supporting ERP directly. You can also have HANA supporting BW directly in an on-top scenario. Okay, and that's actually what is the goal of SAP, because as some of you probably know that in terms of database, the leader is Oracle. Okay, most database systems nowadays are from Oracle, and followed by IBM, and followed by Microsoft database. In other words, majority of database out there are non-SAP databases. Okay, and the goal or the objective of SAP is try to replace those non-SAP databases with SAP HANA as much as possible, so that they can, make more sales in the future. So that's the I guess the long-term goal of SAP HANA. The long-term goal of SAP when they are trying to push HANA to the large corporations. So if your company is considering SAP HANA either now or in the near future, it helps to understand what this database is about. Okay, it is actually not much different from a traditional database in terms of how data is organized. Okay, I talked about earlier that it has both column and row storage. Okay, but majority of data is stored as relational tables. Okay, so you have all kinds of tables that are used to store data. But from the point of view of users, what is important is to understand how data is organized logically. Okay, so how you can view the data logically so that you can utilize data for your business requirements. And we're talking about information models, basically. Okay, in SAP HANA, the information models has basically 3 different views. Regardless how many tables or how many records there are. Okay, so for our purpose, it is important to understand that there are 3 basic views. One is attribute views, which are basically master data in HANA. Okay, and the second is analytic views, which are simplified star schema, which we will talk more about in the future when we talk about the design of a data warehouse. Okay, but analytical views are also related to transaction data or star schema. Okay, so attribute views are master data, analytic views are transaction data or star schema in a data warehouse. And finally, the calculation views are simply combination of attribute views and analytic views. So for some more complex requirements, we may need to create a view that includes both attribute as well as analytic views, and that is known as calculation views. Okay, so with SAP HANA and all the hype about this product, you may be wondering where are exactly the business benefits. And SAP has conducted several pilot studies with the selected companies, and they have found some, tangible benefits that are shown here. Okay, one is that in terms of reporting speed, there is a 3,600 times improvement. So it's like 3,600 times faster than before. Give you an idea, 1 hour has 60 minutes, and 1 minute has 60 seconds, right? So 3,600 is like 3,600 seconds. So a report that used to take, maybe 1 hour to process or to produce, now takes only, 1 second. So that is a tremendous improvement, right? I read about a story some time back in a consulting company where people used to submit certain queries right before lunch break. Okay, because it's mentioned earlier that OLAP systems, they have huge volumes of data, and therefore some queries are so complex they can take 1-2 hours to process, for instance, okay, or even more. So people used to submit those complex queries, during a lunch hour, so that they submit the query and then they go to lunch. Maybe an hour later, they come back. The result is processed, so they get their report. They continue with their work. Okay, so everybody was happy. But after they implemented SAP HANA, and then they found out that once they submit the same query, it did not take an hour to process. Okay, instead, the result came back right away. So I think the title of the story was "There Goes a Lunch Break" or something like that. Okay, so gives you some idea about the tremendous improvement in terms of productivity when using SAP HANA, okay, in terms of query processing. And another tangible measure is how many records are analyzed, in less than a second. Again, we're talking about tremendous amount of data that can be analyzed right away, which is very, very important in in the days of big data. When everybody's talking about terabytes of data that need to be processed and analyzed in real time in all kinds of applications. And they also have some documented figures for revenue that can be expected to increase. Okay. Now this slide comes straight from SAP, so you may need to take a grain of salt whenever you see marketing material like that. But I think it's fair to say that some substantial improvement can be expected if the system is implemented correctly in any company. Okay, I mean, you may not get exactly the same amount of benefit, but some benefit should be expected, can be expected. Finally, there is a business scenario basically talking about a fictitious company known as ABCD Corp, described in the book I want you to read about in Chapter 1. This is a fictitious company involved in manufacturing of electronics products. And we'll be using this company as a case study when talking about BI requirements, BI applications throughout the book. Okay, so in chapter 1, they give an introduction to this company and also some basic business process. So I want you to read about and also to identify different types of data that can be identified from their case description. Okay, I already talked about master data, transaction data several times. I hope you can identify those type of data from the description of the ABCD Corp in chapter 1 as well. Okay, and also configuration data is also important in an ERP system that you probably remember from 647. Okay, and see if you can identify configuration data as well from the case description. And we'll talk more about different types of data in future chapters. And briefly, different types of data are represented differently in BW. So you need to know master data. How to tell master data from transaction data, from configuration data, and so on. Okay. And they also talk about BI requirements as well as business planning scenario, which are common applications of BW nowadays. Okay, so read about them in chapter 1, and we'll be referring back to those requirements in future chapters.